you a professional software developer looking to take your skills to the next level? Maybe new to the field and looking to get everything you need to know? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Dev Coaches Podcast.
All right, and welcome back to the Dev Coaches Podcast. We're back at DogFoodCon here again today, and we're speaking with Warner Moore. Warner, you had a presentation, I believe, yesterday on DevOps, and wanted to just kind of sit down and talk with you and, see what's going on in your life and what things are going on for you.
That's cool.
Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, it's been fun to be here at DogFoodCon. They do a great job with this conference. I was honored to be a part of it, and really what I talked about was the things both startups and established companies can do to enable a technology platform for scale. There's a lot of relatively simple things that are easy to overlook, but make such an impact when it comes to building a scalable and resilient platform.
Like what?
Oh, shoot. Well, just thinking back to the narrative, there are different ways to approach architecture. So feature flags, right? Those are things we all think about in building applications, modern web applications.
Could you tell everybody what a feature flag is?
So a feature flag is, and this helps with environments where deployments happen a lot, right? So if you're deploying 10 times a day, or hundreds of times a day, like in the case of Etsy, if a new feature is introduced, you can turn it on or off within a configuration in an application. So that might be something that's exposed to an employee, as opposed to, say, an engineer or a technical person on the team.
Right.
So others in the organization, if there's an issue with that feature, or as opposed to just making it live right away, they can make it live later as part of a business decision. The thing is, that's how it's often looked at. It's often looked at as empowering employees, less technical folks, or enabling the more business-focused people in an organization to make decisions about an application. But it's just as important from a performance or application availability perspective, right? So, say, for example, a new feature is introduced, and it's on, and suddenly load goes up because of whatever reason. More people are using the feature, and a performance issue that wasn't discovered before takes the entire application down or slows it down a whole lot. It's way easier to respond to that by just turning it off as opposed to, say, reverting to an earlier version of the application. It's much less expensive to flip a bit than it is to redeploy 100 app servers or whatever.
Right. That makes sense. So do you do this in development too then? Or is this like once a feature's ready?
Well, it's the way an application is designed. So if somebody's developing and building an application, if it's not built in a way to turn something off or on with a feature flag, you can't do it practically. Right. So it's more a design philosophy, right?
And actually, I can speak to that. Excuse me. I actually worked for a company where we did a software as a service application for schools. And so we had features that used feature flags to turn them on or off based on the subscription the school wanted. So I'm familiar with the concept.
Yeah, that's cool. And Chaos Monkey, right? Have you guys heard of Chaos Monkey?
I've heard of it. I don't know much about
it.
Yeah.
What about it?
Yeah, the Netflix thing, right? So many have at least heard of it because it's a fun name, a Chaos Monkey, right? A monkey going crazy, throwing things. In the case of Chaos Monkey, it's open source too. Can just download it, search the internet for Netflix Chaos Monkey. And the idea is to randomly break things. So it's really easy to focus on just making something work again when it's broken, but taking a learning culture, a learning philosophy, when something breaks, make it more resilient. That's really what Chaos Monkey's intended to encourage. So it'll go through and turn off servers or parts of the technology stack randomly. That's something Google's also done. I saw a lady speak at Lisa a couple years ago, large installation system admin conference, and she was one of the first DR people. She led the team there, disaster recovery, and she was telling a story about how she walked into a VP's office, and she's like, you know what? I want to unplug this data center. Just turn it off. And the VP looked at her and laughed, and he's like, let's do it. And they didn't say exactly what happened because Google doesn't like to talk about their failures all the time.
Yeah.
But reading between the lines, it seemed likely that it was related to a big Gmail outage many of us might remember from some years back. And it's really cool because they kept on doing it, right? They kept on building test cases where they introduce major failures in their technology platform. And they've learned from it and keep on making more and more resilient platforms. So really that's part of the philosophy, but the whole thing about DevOps, right? I mean, there's a lot of people out there hiring DevOps engineers as a title, and that's a DevOps anti-pattern. It's really a set of culture and practices, and people like to focus on tools, right? It's like, okay, continuous integration or configuration management, but it's more about collaborating cross-functionally, having technology teams working toward shared goals.
So I would think in that space then, if you hire somebody for DevOps, it's more of a coordinator to work with the teams would be the goal, to foster that kind of thought.
That's the way some companies approach it, but also an anti-pattern. So
Okay, and that's good.
So think of, right, a traditional tech organization where you might have the network team and the systems team and the application team, right. And these teams focused on technology.
Mm-hmm.
So back in the day, waterfall, you build to a spec, take a bunch of time to do it, and then deploy it. Well, that worked pretty well. You have more traditional project management and coordinating all those different functions, but those functions focus very much on systems or networks or whatever. Well, using more modern ways to build software, agile, iterative software development, over time, as an organization gets better at that, it's going to speed up delivery.
Right.
So if you're deploying multiple times a day and you don't have test automation, that's often where the bottleneck ends up.
Right.
So the approach is, now we have to automate testing, look at CI tools or not, but really automate testing. And then when test automation in software is being delivered faster and test is no longer the bottleneck, often what happens in an organization that approach technology more traditionally, there might be an infrastructure operations silo. And if that silo is responsible for building servers, deploying applications, or doing any sort of more manual process like ITIL service desk and stuff like that, it ends up being that team is the bottleneck. So that's where DevOps culture and philosophy can come into play. So you create a cross-functional, be it an agile team or whatever words you want to use, but a cross-functional team. You're going to, of course, have software engineers in the team.
Right.
You might have SRE, site reliability engineer, or just a systems engineer in there as well. I advocate for having security being part of that team as well. So all these folks who are responsible for the different parts of the system and might have cross-functional knowledge but deeper expertise in their subject matter can work together for a shared purpose. So it might be a product team, or it could be reliability, right? As opposed to, okay, it's only the systems folks care about reliability. Everyone does. And they bring the perspective of their different disciplines. So that's an example of DevOps in action, where it's really people just working together as opposed to the traditional silos. And then,
I didn't quite follow how the testing bottleneck makes that possible.
well, it's more so when those pain points are what make organizations take a closer look.
Oh, I see.
Though it could stop there, right? It could continue having the infrastructure and more traditional way of managing technology. It could keep it that way, but it wouldn't be as fast delivering value, deploying applications, getting things out there. And taking a closer look at that speeds the entire value chain.
I see.
Really, it's automation end to end. That's what it comes down to. Shared goals, single team,
Right.
and using automation to make all those things work better, be it reliability or getting features out to production and so forth.
So we've heard a lot in this conference about like serverless kind of technologies. Like, how do you feel about that from the DevOps side of things?
It's very much a buzzword in that it's easy to look at a word like that literally. It's like serverless. We don't need servers anymore.
Yeah.
Well, it's really function as a service,
Right.
as opposed to infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. So infrastructure as a service would be AWS or Azure or Google's Compute, all these infrastructure platforms, where it's really just virtualized and you still run servers on it. Well, platform as a service is something like Heroku, where your interaction isn't with the OS, it's more with the APIs that enable the application to run on the platform. And function as a service abstracts that even further.
Right.
So you can build applications that interact with that service platform and deliver smaller increments of value. So serverless is one way to put it, and those solutions can help with certain applications a lot, right? None of those things are better than the other. They all serve different problems. Platform as a service might be great for a startup that doesn't want to focus on lower parts of the stack early on, but it's more expensive typically.
Right.
And there's a certain point at scale where it might not make business sense, or they don't get the full value of controlling the entire technology stack. And same could be said of infrastructure as a service, where it's way easier to use a tool like that to get a product out there early on than it is to take a bunch of capital, buy a bunch of servers, maintain them, and things like that. Now, the function as a service thing can be really cool, or serverless, really cool with stuff like IoT, right?
Yeah.
Or more specialized applications,
Right.
where you don't need as broad of a technology platform.
It seems like it'd be easy to build a feature that is very small in scope using one of those things. But you're right. They're like, it increases, or not increases, it changes the way the DevOps team works, I would think, because you don't have servers anymore, really, right? You have like Azure logins.
Yeah. I think it's easy to get caught up on the latest, greatest thing. And what I like to do is step back and think about things more holistically, right? And I'll tell a quick story, then I'll come back to my point. I was meeting with a partner over at Drive Capital, one of the big VC firms around here, $650 million fund, something like that.
Oh, just a small one then.
Yeah, pretty tiny.
Yeah.
And they only invest in the Midwest, which is super cool, Columbus-based, right?
Yeah.
And I was talking to the partner, and something he said to me really stuck with me, where he said he liked to hire, and I'll use his words, DevOps first. He liked to hire infrastructure and ops folks first. And that was something that stuck with me, because I'm like, okay, I know why. I have that background, and I see the value, but we're talking about somebody who's been a successful business leader, built businesses, sold them, and is now effectively investing his own money in businesses. And this is how he's telling them to spend it on DevOps folks, right? And I thought about it, and it makes a lot of sense. And his thought was, okay, if we're going to build a fast growth business, a scalable business, and we can't scale that tech platform up, and we try and solve that problem later, it's going to be more painful to solve and more expensive to solve. So with that story as the foundation, coming back to my point, looking at things in more of an abstract sense, there's always value from having someone on the team who has operational expertise, who might first think about, okay, how do these things work together? Or if it breaks, how will we fix it? Or if we need a bunch of them quickly, how will we scale it up?
Right.
And somebody who doesn't have that experience may not focus or consider that as much. So going back to your question and thought earlier, well, sure, function as a service may abstract some things and may reduce the need for certain types of expertise. It doesn't eliminate somebody who has that operational...
It would just change the expertise that you would need. Like, it's like, how do I make sure that this function can... Like, yes, maybe Azure may not go down, but our code may get messed up. And then the endpoint doesn't work anymore because we messed up. How do we make that not happen anymore?
Well, Azure goes down. Everything goes down.
Does.
Everything goes down, yeah.
So what happens to the business that relies on the function of the service that goes down? And that's part of it too, right?
Right.
What's contingency plan? And hybrid approaches are often the best. I mean, there's a book called Web Operations. And
Okay.
one of my favorite stories about infrastructure as a service, because a bunch of companies a while back are like, we want all our stuff to be OpEx. We don't want to upgrade our stuff. Let's go AWS. These are large-scale companies. And now some of those companies are starting to realize, well, it's pretty expensive having done that. So in this book, they have a bunch of case studies, and they talk about, try and summarize it, but basically an application that's a photo app that has very unique load profiles. So somebody puts a photo in there, plays with it, and then doesn't touch it again hardly at all over that first week. And then when you get further on the long tail, the next month, there's a certain point where hardly anyone touches it ever.
Right.
So a combination of having super fast storage on site, that's actually physical hardware, and then using things like S3 or even Glacier for that further along that long tail,
Right.
it's much less expensive and solves those specific problems. And in that same case, there's certain parts of the year where suddenly the application is peak utilization. Oh, maybe it's a holiday where...
I'm a retailer and it's Christmas.
Yeah, sure. And dynamically scale. Maybe they have some servers on site serving the application, but not for all of it, because during that peak time, it's such a small window, and being able to dynamically scale in those situations using an infrastructure as a service platform. So that's really what it's about, and that's one example, but being able to look at things like that and consider what makes sense for that application and that business and that service.
Yeah. I was interested to hear that that this guy goes for DevOps first. I wouldn't expect that.
I wouldn't either. And, obviously...
I mean, it makes sense
it
once
does.
you say it.
We come from the dev world as software developers, and oftentimes I think software developers, think that the technology is primary, and that you have to make your architectural decisions based on what stack you're going to use and all that. But developers tend to make assumptions that they know a little bit about the platforms they run on, but they really don't. It takes involving somebody with infrastructure knowledge to really plan it well. And I can see that being really, truly the primary concern. When
you're growing quickly, like staying online is the most important thing you could possibly have, because it could be the best application in the world, and it's offline. It's useless.
And lose a bunch of customers too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There's a certain point, like early in a company's life, where customers have much less patience.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff like that can be a big impact. Yeah, I wouldn't make such a strong position personally. I mean, because early on, if it's between product market fit, trying to get minimum viable product, and just figure out really how to get this business off the ground in the first place.
Sure.
That's going to take priority, and certainly that salesperson might be a key hire. And somebody who builds the product, the software engineer, is going to be absolutely integral.
But I think you need to involve somebody who knows the other side at that point.
I think involving earlier than a lot of companies tend to default. So if you look at life cycle of a startup, you might have the 5 folks: the salesperson, the hacker, the hustler, right? And the startup stereotypes. And really, it's just getting that product off the ground. And then you might have the first 20 or 50 employees. And that's often where a lot of companies will be like, okay, we don't want to invest in operational stuff because we're focused on growth. We're still building product. That's where I'd say that you probably want to start thinking about having that expertise on the team.
I always thought it was weird that more developers don't get more intimate with the actual environment they're going to deploy to. Because it's like it tells you a lot about what is actually possible versus what are we just we don't have the resources for this, and you should know this because you don't you don't log in and look.
Yeah, I think the best engineering teams do have people who look and care about things like that, right? If we look at large-scale distributed computing platforms, so AWS, right? Amazon.
Yeah.
They pretty much introduced the whole thing with microservices. Certainly service-oriented architecture existed before then.
Right.
They managed to scale it. They're a really big company, right? They managed to scale it by having those functional teams I talked about before.
Yeah.
And then those teams could be empowered because they have this service exposed via an API, right? So it's really the same sort of philosophy. In a team like that, large-scale distributed computing platform, having skills and certain types of skill sets siloed doesn't enable that.
Yeah.
A software engineer who is most successful in a team like that does have some operational knowledge.
Yeah.
Systems engineer, a site reliability engineer probably is going to be able to build software. The difference is the depth of expertise in those areas. So somebody might have 10 years of experience in building software. The other might have 10 years of experience in operations. So they'll have a lot more war stories and battle scars. And that type of engineer, those folks working together, that's really the whole DevOps culture and philosophy. That's what provides a whole lot of value in a technology team.
So you mentioned another thing you talked about earlier a little bit was your interest in security and information security and so forth. You also mentioned the Internet of Things. How do you feel about the potential security flaws with the IoT movement?
What are the potential security flaws?
Yeah. If you go to information security meetup, that's something where folks will get pretty passionate about right now. I tend to take a more measured approach. Mm-hmm. In my home, I have an internet-connected thermostat, an internet-connected smoke detector.
Yep.
I have CTs on my electrical mains that are performing analytics and tracking my electrical utilization. And I'm very aware of the things in my environment, and I'm not at all worried about that.
I actually have an internet-connected front door lock. So, I mean, I know there's threat, but I love the convenience.
Could somebody throw a brick through the window
Absolutely.
that's next to the door? Right?
Absolutely.
It's really about looking at what's really at risk and being considerate about it. And disabling UPnP on a router, right? The thing that automatically opens ports without people knowing about it. That's pretty scary.
Wait, what?
Yeah, you don't know about UPnP?
I mean, I've heard the term. I'm vaguely familiar. What is the particular exploit you're talking about?
So it was a protocol that was applied on firewalls to make it easier for end users. So if somebody has technology, maybe it's a TV that needs to get a NAT pack or an Xbox that needs to have inbound connections through the firewall,
Right.
it can use that protocol to open those ports, open those NATs, to actually allow inbound traffic.
Right.
And that was enabled by default on a lot of routers. Probably still is.
Probably.
And if somebody, and it's very likely, right, if somebody does something within the network, and it could be opening an attachment or, any random set of events, and suddenly open a port, well, that's super dangerous. So in that same context, if you have IoT devices that have vulnerabilities that can use that protocol, I'd worry about stuff like that. But I've also disabled that protocol for a long time now.
Meaning if you had like an internet connected fridge, it might let somebody into your network via this weird accident.
It's true. But if that stuff's behind the firewall and, the attack vector coming in is going to be pretty low typically.
Yeah.
And if not, what data does it have? And these are things like...
Probably
who's
more
gonna
of a
think
concern
about
for
this?
a business anyway.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, I've heard a lot about the concern of security with Internet of Things, but I honestly think, we're hearing about Equifax and Deloitte and some of these major data breaches. That's where the money's at, is going after these companies that have huge amounts of data. That's where the value is. I don't see the individual attacks being that prevalent.
Yeah, but you steal $1 from a million people, you still have $1 million.
Yeah.
Here's an example of something a lot of folks do, Internet of Things, right? You know those security cameras, those IP cameras?
Yes.
I use one as a baby monitor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not a baby anymore, but why buy this really expensive proprietary device when I can just take an IP camera and use it, right? People put those right on the internet, and they'll have default usernames and passwords. So you can actually search the internet for the URLs or URIs, depending, of these commonly used video camera products and find all these open cameras on the internet. And there's plenty of examples of stuff like that.
Jeez.
Now that does scare me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Good.
Where are those cameras in my house?
Right.
Are they behind a firewall?
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned some conferences that you're a part of and help organize. You want to talk a little bit about what you've got and what's coming up and promote some of that stuff?
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, community is super important to me. And we have, I say we because many folks are involved in organizing these things, quite a few things coming up. So LAPSA Columbus, a group that's open to everyone. We have people of all disciplines come, software, systems, database, network, security. But really, it's a professional organization for sysadmins. We're meeting October 26th this month in Columbus. You can find out more about that at lapsacbus.org. DevOps Days Ohio, this will be our third year. It's coming up in Columbus on November 8th and 9th. It's only $99 right now. It's going to go up on October 8th. So if you have the opportunity to maybe listen to this podcast before then, you might be able to sneak in and save $50.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
We actually charge less than it cost us to buy food for the individuals because it's community first, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just
How is that sustainable?
sponsors.
Oh, okay.
We're very grateful to our sponsors, and because that's really who helps us make these events possible. Ohio Linux Fest, we just had our 15th year, but we have the 2018 dates announced, October 12th and 13th.
Okay.
Hope to see folks there. Can attend for free as well. If you
That's
want
amazing.
lunch and stuff like that, it's not free, but we had nearly 1,000 people registered this past year, and
Nice.
really a lot of fun. People come from all over the country. We had a gentleman from ICANN come and speak. And I had so much fun because we're joking the whole time. It's like, this is the dude who runs the internet. And it was true.
Yeah.
How often do you get to say that, right?
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. This is great. I enjoyed this.
Yeah, thank you
Can
very
people
much.
follow you on social media somewhere?
Yeah, at Warner, Warner, Moore, Moore on Twitter, and of course on LinkedIn. Always welcome a conversation and love to hear from folks.
Very
Cool.
good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Been
Absolutely.
a pleasure, guys.
Yeah, it's
You
good.
bet.
Thanks so much for listening to the Dev Coaches Podcast. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit devcoaches.com and on Twitter at devcoaches. We'll catch you next time.